Hey guys, it's me Lachlan here today with a brand new topic for us to discuss. Now today we're going to be talking about movement in video games, specifically speaking the shooter genre. So this includes everything from third to first person, and we're going to talk about how movement in a video game could potentially make or break innovation and could potentially hinder a game in general. So we're going to start off this little discussion by talking about the three main stances inside shooters at the moment, and that is of course standing, crouching and prone. Now these three stances tend to be used on a fairly consistent basis, and it's my personal opinion that it is imperative that these stances are utilized 100% of the time. And a good example of this is pretty much in all forms of warfare games. One thing that really bothers me, for example, about Ghost Recon is the fact that you cannot go prone. I feel as though if a game is attempting to emulate any kind of warfare whatsoever, prone has to be in there. You have to be able to lay down. This is important for snipers, it's important for attachments such as bipods, it's important for stealth, and prone in general is just a stance which I would tend to use on a regular basis regardless of what shooter I'm in, be it Call of Duty, Battlefield, and any game that allows it. Prone tends to be used in very good situations, and it definitely is a very key beneficial factor to how a game flows and how mechanics are utilized in game. Now there are of course some examples where prone isn't entitled, it shouldn't be 100% used. Now there are some third-person shooters, for example, or not particularly third-person shooters, but for example third-person action-adventure, where prone isn't used as regularly as it is in, for example, a warfare game. Good preference is The Last of Us and The Last of Us Remastered, as we've seen recently. Prone is not used at all, only a crouching method is used, and obviously cutscenes where you have to lay down, etc. And it's generally left out as a whole. But one of the interesting things we're starting to see now is innovations with these stances to increase the way gameplay mechanics are utilized, increase the skill level, the skill ceiling, and also increase the ways that we can actually play and flow through the game. And a good example of this can be found in the recent simulation shooter, although it's simulation, Arma 3. Now Arma 3 has been doing some real innovation. Of course it is a first to third person interchangeable mechanic, and it allows a ton of different preferences when it comes to how you position your character, and because of this you can create some really big skill margins in how things plan out and how things play out. A good example that you can probably see on screen now is a sitting mechanic. You can even sit down with your weapon and use it to reduce recoil. You can use laying down, you can roll, do a half roll. Of course there is the cover system where you can sort of branch out over the left and right of objects as well. And as you can see, Arma 3 is a game, although simulation, and although some people aren't into simulation, is striving to change the way we play shooter games in general. Coupled with stances is indeed movement speed, and movement speed is something which is very important as to how a game feels, and more important when we're looking at, for example, esports. And esports comes into movement speed in a very aggressive kind of manner, but in a way that's almost unnoticeable. Now, of course, we have our three variations of movement speed depending on the stance that you're in: prone, crawl, crouch moves slowly, sprinting of course as well. But one of the most important factors when it comes to esports is tactical awareness and positioning, and a lot of players will tell you that they use professional headsets or 5.1 headsets, 7.1 headsets in order to increase how they play their game. And the reason this is because they can actually hear footsteps and locations and make judgments based off of what they hear. And that's something which is becoming ever increasingly important. Even for example in Counter-Strike Global Offensive, footsteps is probably one of the biggest things when it comes to positioning enemies and locating where they are. Now one of the good pieces of highlights that we can show you is actually Battlefield Hardline. There was lots of complaints about the movement speed of this game, and this is where we discount esports in general and just talk about how a game feels. And lots of people in the community were generally talking about how they felt sluggish when they were playing. And this wasn't because they were hunking around massive LMGs or sniper rifles or RPGs, it was because just in general the movement speed was quite slow. And because of this they have now made the adjustment to make it similar to that of Battlefield 3 and of course of Battlefield 4. Now as we've seen, movement speed, stances, general game mechanics across the last few years have changed quite drastically, and because of this we are seeing lots of new innovations and lots of things to make games more interesting and sort of groundbreaking titles. But this can be a zone where innovation could potentially damage a game beyond repair, and I can explain this very well for Titanfall, and this is just a general opinion. Some people will probably disagree with me, but as somebody who has played competitive gaming in the past, does a lot of watching of competitive gaming, does a lot of esports commentating when I can personally say that Titanfall got movement very, very wrong. Now, they innovated. They thought, okay, we're going to allow people to jump really high. We're going to allow people to run off of walls. This was a really cool game mechanic. I thoroughly enjoyed my time jumping off of walls, shooting people in the face. But the problem with this is how they have managed their game and how map design comes into play and how just in general movement could actually hinder what they're attempting to do, and that is innovation. Now, one of the reasons Titanfall will not become an esports game, and probably won't ever will at the moment, is just because of its map design and mechanics. Now, the map design at the moment covers a lot of verticality, and you can imagine this because of their free running mechanic. They want to make sure that you can do that a lot, but verticality is something which in general is widely ignored as a whole when it comes to competitive shooters. Most games tend to ignore verticality. Call of Duty, prime example, probably one of the biggest esports game out there. Counter-Strike Global Offensive, again, another perfect example. Verticality is widely ignored, and the reason is because of the indifferences it makes in the map, potential balance indifferences as well, and it can often make or break a map in general, and some maps are and aren't played because of the amount of verticality that they have. For example, Battlefield 4 has recently released their new Dragon's Teeth DLC, which features a map Pearl Market, which has a ton of verticality. You will never see this, specifically because it's a DLC and because of the fact that it has so much, ever played in an esports competitive environment or any kind of competitive environment as a whole. And when it comes to game mechanics, this is where things get a little tricky. Now, of course, they want to innovate. Of course, they want to make a game exciting, make it groundbreaking, and make sure people will actually enjoy the game. And the idea of Titanfall was to change the stagnant idea that we have of, sort of very linear kind of games that we have in the first-person genre, and they were right to try and do this. But the problem that we saw was just the lack of flow. If you go into a Titanfall game, if you've ever played Titanfall, you will notice that there are no choke points, and choke points are indeed important to how a game plays. A choke point essentially is an area of reference. So if we're playing, for example, Team Deathmatch, we're all going to go through certain lanes and alleyways and certain directions which create combat and create different environments for us to fight in. Whereas on Titanfall, because of this verticality, because of this, free-running roam environment, you can basically go at something in any which direction. Of course, this makes for great flanking and great interest, and of course, somewhat interesting play. But when it comes to esports, the whole point is that we're meant to go down these lanes, we're meant to try and use the map to our advantage, not to, fly around it and get kills nice and easily, and it's not working the way that they intended it to. And you can see, again, big reference point, Call of Duty, CSGO, two of the biggest esports games out there, have none of this. They are linear titles, and they are, generally pretty well paced and pretty well flowed, and because of their map design, they have very good choke points and a very good flow of gameplay. Now, this discussion becomes quite interesting, and this is primarily down to Call of Duty's new installment, and I have been centralizing around this game quite a lot because of the game that it is and because of how well it does at esports. And of course, Call of Duty Esports carries on over to every title that is new. So be it Black Ops, COD Ghosts, anything, esports will exist. Esports players and teams, for example, Optic, FaZe, Team Caliber, all of them, Envious, they will play the upcoming title Advanced Warfare. And as we have seen in the trailer, jumping appears to be something which is indeed in Advanced Warfare, and even the reference of gloves to potentially climb buildings. And this could potentially completely destroy Call of Duty Esports if they are not careful. And this jumping mechanic as well could also produce a very big problem for esports players. Now, esports players tend to be very tactical. They like their play, they like the layout of the maps, and they use that to their advantage. But never has it been, up until now, that mechanics have also factored in as to how they play. It's a very simple, linear, basic shooter, and that's what, sort of creates the skill levels that there are. Jump shots, diving shots. There's all types of shots that you can do using the maps, flanking routes, and that's what the map design provides. But when it comes to mechanics, again, linear and simplistic is how they roll. So when they see that in Advanced Warfare you can jump backwards over a person or potentially jump on top of a building, this could create the lack of flow and lack of gameplay, which is essentially what made Titanfall a very, very difficult game. And it's because they're trying to compete with Titanfall. They haven't actually thought about games in general. They are just doing this to literally emulate and compete against Titanfall. And because of this, I feel as though there is a possibility that Call of Duty may not progress in terms of esports as people hoped it would. Now, Advanced Warfare does look good, but there are a few things that I think they can personally do to make sure that their new groundbreaking mechanic, which basically did feature in Titanfall, which is jumping and potentially climbing up walls with gloves, does not go too far. Now, of course it doesn't want to be linear anymore. Of course it's going to have the stances that we're always used to, but it's going to have this new jumping mechanic. And what I'd suggest is a cooldown mechanic or only being able to climb. Now, if you have a cooldown mechanic which would stop players from jumping regularly and jumping on top of buildings consistently, that would change the flow of gameplay. People would be stuck to the ground a bit more and it would reduce verticality. And that's a very important benefactor of how esports games carry out. And another thing, of course, is climbing only. Now, there has been a suggestion that we saw in the original trailer that you can get gloves that can climb walls. And now I would suggest, and this is something, you know, unless they found a way to balance the jumping to make sure it flows well, is to just allow climbing. If they can allow you to climb the side of a building in a certain amount of time, that's fine. That will work well. That will allow, rather than having multiple levels of verticality where players are going to be jumping on top of roofs and then jumping down and killing people from above or killing people from below, have 2 levels of verticality where players slowly climb up to this second level of verticality and can't really kill people from below, because if they jump down they get killed, of course, themselves. And it makes for an environment which doesn't allow, shall we say, I'm going to call it noob jumping, but it's not potentially, you know, a noob tactic. It is indeed a very clever tactic if jumping is allowed. But if you jump from building to building, you're jumping over alleyways and, you know, you're getting into these really good spots on a consistent basis, it makes for a very tricky game. It makes, for example, you know, capture the flag will be a useless mode. Search and destroy would not work properly. All of these games would have to somehow use buildings and indoors to their advantage. Because if you've got people climbing all over the roofs, how are you going to be able to put a flag up there or something, you know? And we're going to see, you know, competitive games such as Domination and, you know, Search and Destroy really suffer if the jumping mechanic is OP and it happens on a consistent basis. So the general consistency that I'm saying here is Call of Duty as a whole for Advanced Warfare is a make or break game. Innovation is important. It's something that they haven't done in fuck knows how long because it's Call of Duty and they never innovate. But it's something that has been core to the game, and it's non-linear, and it's basic, and it's simple. It's what CSGO has achieved across many years now, and it's why it's one of the best and biggest esports games at the moment. Battlefield 4 is an upcoming esports title. The franchise as a whole is attempting to adopt esports, and it does well because it has certain mechanics. It has linear mechanics, but it doesn't have anything that could potentially hinder it in terms of movement speeds, things like that Advanced Warfare has to be very careful with. So guys, that's about it for my opinion, and of course, you know, this is just perspective from somebody who has watched esports, somebody who's played esports, or somebody who's casted esports, and I want to know what you personally think about jumping, climbing, and all this stuff that we're starting to see nowadays. And I want you to think before you make your comments on, you know, this video in general, because I'm expecting somewhat of a negative feedback. Look at games such as Crysis 3, look at games such as Titanfall, and look at all of these games which allow crazy jumping, crazy speeds, and ridiculous stuff. Maybe bar Halo, because Halo's a bit more of a, it's not a military shooter, it's more of a arcadey style shooter. But if you look at Titanfall and Crysis, these games that were hyped up to be incredibly good esports games, which failed in almost an instance. Look at why, look at map design, and look at mechanics, and then make your comment. So guys, it's been me, Lachlan. Thank you for tuning in. It's been a very long video, roughly 15 minutes. As usual, I can't stop talking. But anyways, thank you for watching, and I will see you again with another video.